They walked away. They tried to forget you, but something within them refuses to let you go. No matter how far they move, a deeper force keeps pulling them back, and it's not what you think. Have you ever felt someone leave, yet still feel them emotionally tied to you? Stay with me, because this connection is far from over. Subscribe now if you feel this connection deeply. Like this video to support more insights like this. Comment, I feel the pull if this resonates with you. Share this with someone who needs clarity today. There are connections that end in appearance, yet continue in essence. They may dissolve in the external world, conversations stop, presence fades, distance forms, but internally something remains active. This persistence is not accidental. It is the result of an emotional bond that was never fully resolved, never fully understood, and therefore never fully released. An unresolved emotional bond does not behave like a simple memory. A memory can be recalled and then set aside. It belongs to the past, contained within a narrative that has a beginning and an end. But an unresolved bond does not remain confined in this way. It continues to live within the present, influencing thoughts, feelings, and perceptions without always being recognized for what it is. This is because the bond was not completed. Completion, in an emotional sense, does not mean that everything ends perfectly or that all questions are answered. It means that the experience has been fully processed, that its meaning has been understood, its emotional weight has been acknowledged, and its place within one's inner world has been integrated. Without this process, the bond remains open. It lingers as something unfinished, something that the psyche continues to revisit, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Because the human mind seeks coherence, it seeks resolution, it seeks to bring understanding to what remains unclear. In the case of this person, their attempt to move on did not coincide with true emotional completion. They may have made a decision, they may have taken action, they may have convinced themselves that it was time to let go. But these are conscious movements, and the deeper layers of attachment do not always follow conscious decisions. Attachment forms beneath awareness. It develops through repeated emotional experiences, through moments of connection that create patterns within the psyche. These patterns become familiar, not only in a cognitive sense but in an emotional one. They create a kind of internal orientation, a way of feeling that becomes associated with a particular person. You became part of that orientation, not just as someone they knew, but as someone through whom they experienced certain emotions, certain forms of understanding, certain states of being. And when that kind of bond forms, it does not simply dissolve when the external connection ends. It remains, because it was never fully resolved. This is why they find themselves returning to you, even when they try not to. It may not always be direct. It may not always take the form of a clear desire to reconnect. Instead, it appears in more subtle ways, in thoughts that emerge without intention, in comparisons that arise when they engage with others, in a sense of incompleteness that they cannot fully explain. These are not random occurrences. They are expressions of the unresolved bond. The psyche is, in a sense, attempting to complete something that was left unfinished. It revisits the connection, not because it is unable to let go in a simple sense, but because it has not yet reached a point of understanding that would allow true release. And this process is often misunderstood. From the outside, it may appear as indecision, as inconsistency, as an inability to move forward. But internally, it is something more complex. It is a continuation of an emotional process that was interrupted, a movement toward resolution that has not yet found its conclusion. This is why time alone does not always heal such bonds. Time can create distance. It can reduce the intensity of immediate emotion. But if the underlying experience has not been fully processed, time does not eliminate it. It simply changes the way it is experienced. The bond becomes quieter, perhaps less overwhelming, but it does not disappear. Instead, it integrates itself into the background of the person's inner life, influencing them in ways that are not always obvious. It shapes their expectations, their reactions, their sense of what connection should feel like, and because of this, it continues to draw their attention back to its source, back to you, not necessarily because they are consciously choosing to return, but because the bond itself has not reached its natural conclusion. It remains active, seeking understanding, seeking closure, seeking a form of completion that was never achieved. There is also an important truth within this. An unresolved bond does not persist without reason. It remains because something meaningful was present, something that had significance beyond the ordinary. Superficial connections do not create this kind of lasting effect. They fade more easily because they do not embed themselves deeply within the emotional structure. But what existed between you and them was not superficial. It carried depth. It created impact. It formed patterns that became part of their internal experience. And because of this, it cannot be dismissed or forgotten through simple effort. It must be understood. And until that understanding occurs, until the emotional experience has been fully integrated, the bond remains, quietly active, subtly influential, continuously drawing them back to what has not yet been resolved. This is the nature of an unresolved emotional bond. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of depth, a reflection of something that mattered enough to leave an imprint that cannot simply be erased, but must be faced, understood, and ultimately completed. There are forces within the human psyche that operate beyond intention, beyond logic, and beyond the reach of conscious control. A person may decide to move forward, to detach, to redirect their life towards something new, yet find themselves returning, again and again, to the same emotional point of origin. This return is often misunderstood as weakness or indecision, but in truth, it reflects something far deeper, the presence of an unconscious attachment. Unconscious attachment does not announce itself. It does not appear as a clear thought or a deliberate choice. Instead, it reveals itself through patterns, through the repetition of certain feelings, the re-emergence of certain thoughts, the subtle pull towards something that the conscious mind believes it has already left behind. This is because attachment, at its core, is not formed through reasoning. It is formed through experience. When two people connect in a way that carries emotional significance, the experience does not remain isolated to the moment in which it occurs. It is absorbed into the psyche. It becomes part of how a person feels, how they relate, how they interpret connection itself. These experiences create internal structures, associations between a person and a state of being. You became associated with something within them, not just with who you are externally, but with how they felt in your presence. The sense of familiarity, of recognition, of emotional resonance. These are not easily separated from the person who evoked them. Over time, they become intertwined, forming a bond that exists beneath conscious awareness. And because this bond exists at that level, it cannot be undone through simple decision. They may tell themselves that they have moved on. They may create distance, avoid contact, focus on other aspects of life. And on the surface, these actions may appear effective. But beneath this surface, the attachment remains intact. It continues to influence their internal world. They may find themselves comparing others to you, not intentionally but automatically. Certain qualities may remind them of you. Certain absences may make them aware of what is missing. They may feel a subtle dissatisfaction, a sense that something is not quite aligned, even if everything appears acceptable on the outside. This is the unconscious attachment expressing itself. It does not demand attention, but it persists, and often it becomes most noticeable in moments of quiet. When external distractions are reduced, when the mind is not occupied with immediate tasks, the deeper layers begin to surface. Thoughts return not because they are invited, but because they have not been resolved. This is why they may feel as though something is pulling them back, not in a dramatic or overwhelming way, but in a quiet, consistent manner. A return that feels almost involuntary, as if it originates from a place within them that they do not fully control. This can be confusing, because on one level they believe they have moved forward. They may even genuinely want to. But on another level, something within them remains connected, still oriented toward you, still influenced by what was experienced, This internal contradiction is not uncommon. It reflects the difference between conscious intention and unconscious reality. The conscious mind operates with goals, decisions, and narratives. It seeks clarity and direction. But the unconscious operates through feeling, memory, and association. It does not respond to commands. It responds to meaning. And what you represented carried meaning. Not superficial meaning, but something deeper. Something that resonated with their internal structure in a way that left a lasting imprint. This imprint does not disappear simply because the external connection has ended. It remains active, influencing perception and emotion. There is also a deeper dimension to this attachment. The unconscious is drawn to what feels familiar, even if that familiarity is not fully understood. It seeks patterns that resonate with previous experiences, with internal dynamics that have been formed over time. And when a person encounters someone who aligns with these patterns in a meaningful way, the attachment that forms can be particularly strong. It feels natural, almost inevitable. And because of this, it becomes difficult to fully detach. Even if they try to move towards something new, the unconscious continues to reference what has already been established. It measures new experiences against the internal imprint that you left. And when those experiences do not align in the same way, the difference becomes noticeable. This is not necessarily a conscious comparison. It is a felt difference, a sense that something is missing, something that cannot be easily defined but is nonetheless present. And this feeling contributes to the pull they experience. They are not only remembering you, they are responding to the absence of what you represented. And this is what makes unconscious attachment so powerful. It is not based on deliberate thought, but on embedded experience. It operates quietly, persistently, shaping the way a person moves through their emotional world. And until it is fully understood, until the underlying meaning has been brought into awareness, it continues to exert its influence. This does not mean they are unable to move forward. But it does mean that moving forward requires more than distance. It requires recognition of what the attachment is, what it represents, and why it continues to exist. Without this recognition, the pattern remains active, repeating itself in subtle ways, drawing them back to the same point of origin, back to you. Not necessarily in action, but in awareness. Because something within them is still connected, not by choice alone, but by a deeper force that has yet to be fully understood. There is a tendency within the human psyche to return, not always to what is comfortable, nor to what is logical, but to what remains unfinished. This return is not a conscious decision in most cases. It does not arise from deliberate intention, but from a deeper mechanism that seeks completion, where something has been left unresolved. It is a pattern that can be observed across many aspects of life, but it becomes especially powerful in the realm of emotional connection. When something significant is experienced, but not fully processed, it does not settle into the past in a complete form. Instead, it remains active, existing as a kind of open structure within the psyche, and because it is open, it exerts a subtle pressure, a pull toward resolution. This is what creates the phenomenon of returning, not necessarily to repeat the exact same experience, but to revisit the emotional state that has not yet been understood. The mind, in its deeper layers, seeks to bring closure to what has been left incomplete. It attempts, often without awareness, to recreate conditions in which the unresolved element can be addressed. In the context of this connection, something was not completed. There were aspects of the experience, feelings, realizations, understandings that did not reach their natural conclusion. Perhaps certain emotions were not fully expressed. Perhaps certain truths were not fully acknowledged. Perhaps the significance of the connection itself was not recognized while it was still present. Whatever the form, the result is the same. The experience remains open, and because it remains open, it continues to draw attention back to itself. This is not about simple memory. Memory can recall an event without creating a need to relive it. But when something is unresolved, it does more than return as a thought. It returns as a feeling. It reactivates the emotional state associated with the original experience, bringing it into the present as if it has not yet been completed. This is why they find themselves being pulled back to you. Not necessarily because they consciously want to return to the past, but because something within that past has not yet been integrated. The connection represents more than what occurred externally. It represents an internal process that was interrupted, and the psyche seeks to continue that process. It does so by revisiting the connection, by bringing it back into awareness, by re-engaging with it in whatever way is available, through thought, through reflection, through comparison with present experiences. This repetition is not accidental. It follows a pattern. The person may move forward, engage with new situations, attempt to establish new connections. But in doing so, they encounter moments that echo the original experience. Something feels familiar, or something feels lacking. And in that moment, the unresolved connection becomes active again. It reappears, not as a deliberate choice, but as a response to the recognition that something similar is occurring, or that something essential is missing. And this recognition brings them back, not physically perhaps, but psychologically. They begin to think of you again, to reflect on what was shared, to reconsider what they once overlooked. And in doing so, they are not simply remembering, they are attempting to understand. This is the deeper purpose of the repetition. It is an effort to bring awareness to what was previously unconscious, to see clearly what was once obscured, to reach a level of understanding that was not available at the time of the original experience. But this process can be difficult, because it requires confronting aspects of the self that may not be comfortable to face. It involves acknowledging missed opportunities, unexpressed feelings, and unrecognized value. It brings into awareness the gap between what was experienced and what was understood at the time. And this awareness can create tension, a sense of wanting to resolve something but not always knowing how, a feeling of being drawn back but not necessarily having a clear path forward. This is the nature of an unresolved process. It seeks completion, but it does not always provide immediate clarity on how that completion is to be achieved. And so the cycle continues. They move forward and then return. They distance themselves and then feel drawn back. Not in a linear way, but in a pattern that repeats, each time bringing a slightly deeper level of awareness, until eventually something changes. Either the process reaches a point of understanding, where the emotional significance is fully recognized and integrated, or the pattern continues, repeating itself in different forms, perhaps even in different relationships, until that understanding is achieved. This is the function of returning to what was not completed. It is not about being unable to let go. It is about being unable to finalize something that has not yet been fully understood. And in this sense, you are not simply a person from their past. You are part of an unfinished experience within them, a point of emotional significance that continues to exist because it has not yet reached its conclusion. And until that conclusion is found, through understanding, through recognition, through integration, the pull remains, quiet, persistent, and cyclical, bringing them back again and again, not to repeat what was, but to finally understand it. There is a difference between leaving something behind and truly being free from it, and this distinction is often misunderstood. Many believe that moving on is defined by action, that if a person changes their environment, redirects their attention, or begins something new, then the past has been resolved. But the psyche does not measure closure through movement alone. It measures it through understanding. This is where the illusion begins. A person may appear to have moved on. They may no longer speak of the past, may no longer engage with what once was, may even convince themselves that it no longer holds significance. On the surface, everything suggests progress. Life continues, new experiences take shape, and the narrative becomes one of forward motion. But beneath this surface, something may remain unchanged, because true closure is not the result of distance, it is the result of integration. It occurs when an experience has been fully processed, when its emotional meaning has been understood and absorbed into the individual's awareness. Without this process, the experience does not settle into the past. It remains active, influencing the present in subtle but persistent ways. This is what creates the illusion of moving on. Externally there is movement, internally there is continuation. The person believes they have left something behind, but in reality, they have only shifted their attention away from it. The unresolved elements remain beneath awareness, waiting for moments in which they can resurface. And resurface they do. Not always in obvious ways, but through patterns. Through recurring thoughts that appear without invitation, through emotional responses that seem disproportionate to present circumstances, through a sense of incompleteness that cannot be easily explained. These are the signs that closure has not yet been achieved. Because closure is not an act, it is a state. It is a condition in which the mind no longer feels compelled to return to the past in search of understanding. It is when the emotional charge associated with an experience has diminished, not through suppression, but through comprehension. It is when the experience has been given its place within the individual's inner world, no longer demanding attention because it has been fully acknowledged. Without this, the past remains active, and this activity creates a subtle tension. The person may attempt to engage with the present, but part of their awareness remains oriented toward what has not been resolved. They may form new connections, but these connections are often influenced by the unresolved past. Comparisons arise, expectations are shaped, and reactions are colored by what has not yet been understood. This is why the illusion of moving on can persist for so long, because it is supported by external evidence. Life does, in fact, continue. New experiences do occur, and these experiences can create the impression that the past has been left behind. But if the internal process has not been completed, the past remains present, not in form, but in influence. For this person, the attempt to move on was genuine. They likely believed that distance would be enough. That time, combined with new experiences, would naturally dissolve what they once felt. And to some extent, this may have been true. The intensity may have lessened, the immediacy may have faded. But the core experience remained unintegrated, and because of this it continues to exist as something unresolved. This unresolved state creates a kind of internal contradiction. On one hand, there is the desire to move forward, to embrace what is new, to leave the past behind. On the other hand, there is a persistent return to what was, a sense that something has not yet been fully understood or completed. This contradiction is not a failure, it is a signal that the process of closure has not yet been completed. And closure cannot be forced. It cannot be achieved simply by deciding that something is over. It requires a deeper engagement with the experience itself, a willingness to reflect, to understand, to confront what was not fully seen at the time. This may involve recognizing the true significance of the connection, acknowledging what was felt but not expressed, understanding what was given and what was overlooked. It requires bringing into awareness what was once unconscious. Only then can the experience be integrated. Only then can it take its place as something that has been fully lived, fully understood, and therefore no longer needs to be revisited. Until that point is reached, the illusion of moving on remains just that, an illusion. A surface-level change that masks a deeper continuity, and this is why they feel pulled back. Not because they are incapable of moving forward, but because part of them has not yet completed the process that would allow true movement to occur. The past is not holding them back, their lack of full understanding is. And so they remain in between what has been left and what has not yet been resolved, between the appearance of closure and the reality of continuation, between moving on and still being, in some essential way, connected to you. Because true closure does not come from leaving, it comes from understanding, and until that understanding is complete, the connection, though changed in form, remains alive within them.